Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Global Star Party. It's probably going to be a short one tonight because Stephen and I both have clouds, but we'll see what we can find to bring you. How are you going, Stephen?
Hi, Paul. How are you doing this evening, or this afternoon? I guess in your case, or morning, or sometime in the day over there.
Yep, cloudy afternoon.
Yes, well, it's I'm in Macon, Georgia, and it was looking pretty good earlier, but we've had enough clouds to come in that just really can't get anything live for you tonight. But I do have some images to share, and we can go through some of the images submitted to our Flickr group, and perhaps we'll get lucky and get you a little break in the clouds to show us some live sun.
Yeah, with any luck. At the moment, we've got the scope pointing out that way, but Mr. Cloud wants to be in the same part of the sky. Hopefully if I can see that image, that's the Paramount MX with the 12-inch bead scope on it at the moment. Do a bit of planetary imaging.
Yes.
And right on top of that you can't see is the solar scope.
So you obviously are a big fan of the Lunt brand of solar scopes, right?
As far as I'm concerned, that's the only brand of solar scope.
Yeah, no, there are some other brands out there, but I guess we shall not mention their names, I guess. I am also a Lunt owner. Only have the 50 millimeters. That's the smallest one that they make, but still does a pretty good job, I will say. I've been very pleased with it so far.
Yep, the good quality US-made scopes.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe they're made in Arizona, if I remember correctly. They do a very good job.
Not made in some third world country like some other brands we won't mention.
This is true. Okay, well, I don't know how many people are watching, but we're glad to have them here wherever they might be. So Paul, just to recap, you are in New Zealand, and I am in, like I say, Macon, Georgia, in the center part of the state. And the big event this past week, at least for those of us on this side of the world, was the transit of Mercury. Now, transits of Mercury are fairly rare. They're not as rare as transits of Venus. However, the transits of Mercury on average happen approximately 13 times per century. So that's still pretty rare. And the next one, if I remember correctly, will be in November of 2019 and will also favor Europe and the eastern part of the United States, if I remember correctly, there as well. So I think poor Paul will be shut out of that one as well. So Mercury transits basically are when Mercury passes directly between us and the sun in our line of sight to the sun. Now, Mercury orbits the Earth every 88 days or so, but Mercury's orbit is tilted at about 7 degrees. So it's usually a bit above or below our direct line of sight to the sun. However, this past Monday, for about 7.5 hours, our Mercury did pass directly in that line of sight. And I was hoping that my good buddy Daniel Heron could have joined us. He got some really good photos and video of the transit. And I did get a few pictures, not nearly as many as Daniel. So if you give me just a second, I'll pull up one of my photos of the transit here. Give me just a second here. Let's see, screen share. And here we go. Okay, so Paul, can you see that?
I can.
Okay, so this is a photo that I took on Monday afternoon here in central part of Georgia. Now this is using a white light filter. This was not using the hydrogen alpha that Paul uses so well. This was with a camera, a Canon 70D, and I was using a Tamron camera lens as a zoom lens of 150 millimeters all the way up to 600 millimeters. So I was using this at full zoom 600 millimeters with a white light filter on the end of the lens. And what you'll notice here is there is a sunspot near the center, just sort of to the left. Sunspots typically look fairly splotchy. They're not perfectly round usually. But that black dot that you can see just below the center, that is actually the planet Mercury. And this was, as it was pretty much closest to the center of the sun, at least from my vantage point there. The transit began here in Georgia right at sunrise. I think it was around 7:15, 7:20-ish. And we were clouded out at that time where I was. But around 10:30 or so, the clouds parted, at least enough for us to get some shots. So you'll see the black dot there is Mercury. Now, Mercury does look really, really small there. Some of you may have seen the transit of Venus back in 2012, and Venus was much larger. Of course, Venus is a larger planet than Mercury, but also Venus is a lot closer to us. At the time of the transit, Mercury was, I believe, around 51 million miles from Earth. Of course, the sun is 93 million miles away, but Venus being much closer to Earth will, of course, look much larger. Of course, Venus, I think, is about the same size as the Earth, so it's much larger, obviously, than Mercury. So that's one shot there you can see of the transit. And if you'll give me just a second, I'll pull up another one here. Give me just a moment here while I pull that up. I have another shot that I took of the transit where Venus was much closer to the edge. And if you'll give me just a second here, I'll pull that one up. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. We'll go back to the screen share here. Oops, well, there we go. All right, so here we go. Now, this particular shot was obviously very close to the end of the transit. The transit here in Georgia ended around 2:40 p.m. in the there. This was probably maybe 10, 15 minutes before the end of the transit. So the shot that you just saw of the previous one, where Mercury was very near the center, that was probably about 4 hours, 3.5 to 4 hours before this shot was taken. You can also see toward the center there's more sunspot activity, and that's because by this time in the afternoon the skies had really cleared. There were still some thin clouds earlier, so the shot earlier did not reveal as much sunspot activity there on the center part of the sun. So as Paul and I both know, and all you amateur astronomers out there know, sometimes when you're shooting those high clouds, even though you can still get an image, you're not going to be able to always get the most clear of images because of those high clouds. So by this time, luckily, the clouds had pretty much gone out of the way, so you can get a lot more detail there. And as you can see, Mercury is on its way off the edge of the sun down at the bottom there. And again, my good friend Daniel Heron had a great video where he actually had the video as Mercury was leaving the edge of the sun there. If you have access to YouTube, do a search for Daniel Heron, Herron is his last name, Daniel, and you'll see some amazing videos that he did. He might have even posted them on the Google Plus page for the Global Star Party, I'm not sure. But anyway, so there's a nice, pretty good other picture of the transit, a little clearer view of the sunspots, and also Mercury there close, very close to the edge there. Okay, I'll go ahead and close that out. Okay, let's see, there we go. Okay. So Paul, you said you were gonna, did you actually get anything from the Venus transit, or did you say it was clouded out a few years ago?
It clouds last Venus transit.
Oh dear. Yeah, the Venus transit that we saw here in 2012 was late in the afternoon, almost sunset time for us here. And all day, I remember it was cloudy, cloudy, cloudy. But luckily, about 30 minutes before the transit started, here in Georgia, we got clear enough skies that we could actually get some good images of it. But I do remember the transit of Venus quite well. And when I was looking at the Mercury one the other day, I was sort of amazed at how much smaller Mercury was than Venus. Of course, I knew it would be smaller, but I just, was still, until you actually see it, you really don't know there. Okay. Okay, so so those were a couple of images of the the Mercury transit. And I'd also like to share something with you that is actually happening right now, at least if you're in part of the world where it's dark. Right now, if you were to go outside and look up at the moon, you would see a very bright object very near the moon. And most people will think that that's a star. However, the bright object near the moon in your sky tonight will actually be Jupiter. Speaking of our other planets here. So I'll pull up an image here for you. And I took this image about 30 minutes before this hangout started, before the Global Start Party tonight. So from my skies here, this was my last little window of clear skies here. Obviously, you'll see the moon in the bottom right corner. We're in the waxing gibbous phase, just past first quarter, which was yesterday. And in the upper left corner, you will see there is Jupiter. And Jupiter, again, is the brightest object you'll see in the sky tonight besides the moon. And approximately, once a month or so, the moon and Jupiter sort of get together and have these little conjunctions, we call them. The reason that this happens is because, like all the planets and the moon, Jupiter travels in what we call the ecliptic. The ecliptic is sort of the plane of our solar system, so all the planets travel very near the ecliptic. For example, if you're in the northern hemisphere, you would never see Jupiter near, let's say, Polaris, for example. Polaris is the North Star. So Jupiter will never go by Polaris. It always stays much more to the south. And if you were in the southern hemisphere where Paul is, you would see the planets more into the northern part of their sky. So you would never see, for example, a planet near, I guess, sort of maybe the Southern Cross down in that part of the sky. Am I right about that, Paul? Or am I getting my directions mixed up there?
Yep, you're right. They all sort of pass to the north.
Yeah, for you guys, they're in the north. For us, they're in the south. So if you were living along the equator, then the planets would basically go almost directly over your head, because you're pretty much in that ecliptic area there. But again, if you're farther north or south you go away, the lower the planets will appear in your sky. So in our sky here in the northern hemisphere, if you look a bit to the south, you will see the moon and Jupiter. Hopefully you have clear skies. But again, if you miss it this time, just look for it, about 28 days from now, and you'll have a similar conjunction. The moon also has conjunctions with the other planets as well. Of course, right now, a little bit later in the evening, you'll be able to see Saturn and Mars. We have a Mars conjunction coming up fairly soon. A Mars opposition. That's when Mars is sort of aligned with us and the sun. And then we have an opposition of Saturn a little bit later. I want to say maybe in June. Perhaps I have to look on my calendar to see that. But anyway, right now, so if you have clear skies and it's dark, just step outside and take a look at the moon, and nearby you will see Jupiter there hanging out very, very close by. If you have a pair of binoculars, you might even take a look at Jupiter, and you might be able to resolve some of the moons of Jupiter. Jupiter has 4 large moons. They're called the Galilean moons, named obviously for Galileo, who first observed them in the early 1600s with his telescope. And those moons are visible from Earth, even with a fairly, mid-sized pair of binoculars or a small telescope, you can resolve usually 4 moons. And the interesting thing about the 4 moons is from night to night, they're in different positions. One night you might see 2 on each side. The next night you might see all 4 on one side, or 3 on one side, 1 on the other. And even other times you might only see, let's say, 3 moons, because one moon could be on the other side of Jupiter or could be transiting in front of Jupiter. And a lot of astrophotographers get photos of Jupiter with what looks like a black dot on the planet, and those are actually shadows from the moons whenever some of those transits happen. So Jupiter is obviously our largest planet and one of our most photogenic objects in the sky. I know Paul's done a lot of really good planetary imagery of Jupiter, and sort of as another bonus, sometimes if you're looking at the right time, you can even catch the great red spot of Jupiter. Jupiter has a very, very fast day, I guess. I think it's around 10 hours is one day on Jupiter. It's obviously much, much larger than Earth. So their day is much shorter, which means it spins really, really fast. And those planets really whip around Jupiter because of the intense gravity that it has. So if you can take a look at Jupiter with say binoculars or a small telescope, look out for those 4 moons that are hanging out nearby there. Paul, would you happen to have any fairly recent images of Jupiter with the moons you could share?
Just looking there.
Now that I've rambled on about it.
It's been rather cloudy lately, so the sort
We can go
of...
back in time if we need to. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go and sort of take a look at our Flickr group. For those of you who would like to post some of your own pictures that we might be able to show during the Global Star Party, we have a Flickr group. So if you're familiar with the Flickr website, Flickr, flickr.com, Flickr is a social media site for photographers, and you can sign up for a free account on Flickr. They give you a huge amount of storage space, and you can join groups. And there is a Global Star Party group that you can join. Just go to the groups option and do a search for Global Star Party, and you can join our group and post photos. We got people from all over the world that post some really great photos here on our page here. So let's see here.
Well, there's an image with Jupiter and the moons. I don't know what moon's which. It's from last year.
Okay, so here we go. Yeah, there we go. There's all 4 moons there. So you can also see Paul got the great red spot. Now, from Paul's perspective, the spot will be sort of in that upper right corner. Our perspective in the northern hemisphere, that would be reversed. We would see it on the lower half of Jupiter from our perspective. So the moons that you see here, again, I'm not sure which one is which, but I believe we have Callisto, Ganymede, Io, and Europa. Again, those are not necessarily in that order, but those are the 4 Galilean moons that, again, Galileo observed in 1610 or so. I forget the exact year. But that was one of the things that actually sort of helped convince Galileo that we were, not the center of the universe as people thought we were back then, because he actually was able to figure out that those little dots that he was observing were orbiting around Jupiter. So he saw 2 or 3 of them the first night, and I want to say he finally got all 4 of them after a week or so. But he was able to calculate their orbits and predict where they would be on different nights. So he was actually, obviously very important to us for a lot of reasons. But these moons of Jupiter were one of the key astronomical discoveries, really, of all time. And this is something, again, you can observe these. So if you were to go out and look, you might not see the moons in this particular configuration tonight. Here we go. This is fantastic. I mentioned earlier, sometimes you see a little black dot on Jupiter. And this is because one of the moons is passing in front or casting a shadow, at least, on Jupiter. And obviously, we got the great red spot there. Again, this is a really nice detail here. You can see the cloud bands of Jupiter very well here, and there's that black dot. So one of the moons was casting this shadow on Jupiter when Paul took this photo here. Paul, did you take this with your 12-inch?
No, I think that was done with a little refractor from memory.
With a refractor. So refractors are usually smaller scopes than, for example, I've never seen a 12-inch refractor in person, but that would be pretty massive. But I'm guessing, is it your a 5-inch refractor or 6-inch?
Yeah, it'd be the 132 millimeter.
Oh yeah, I keep forgetting millimeter. So yeah, 132. Let's see. My 4-inch refractor was 102 millimeters. So I guess yours is about a 5-inch. Because again, in America, we still use the whole inches thing here. But yeah, this is a really nice shot with a refractor. So not a huge telescope here. I'm sure you probably had a Barlow or 2 on that.
It's probably a 2.5 Barlow, I guess.
Yeah, when you're shooting planetary objects like this, you want to get as much zoom as you can with the equipment that you have. So we sometimes use what we call a Barlow. A Barlow usually will double or sometimes triple, or in your case, magnify by 2.5 times to get you more magnification on the object. One thing you have to be careful about with a Barlow is the Barlow, because of the increase in magnification, it increases your focal ratio, which sort of means you're getting less light in the scope, and it becomes a little harder to focus, and objects may not be as bright because of Barlows, but that's the trade-off for getting more magnification. And every telescope has sort of a theoretical maximum magnification it can have. So if your scope is fairly small, for example, using a 3x or 3 times Barlow may not get you really good results. It just may be too much magnification for what your scope can actually produce. So whenever you buy a scope, that may be something you want to look for, is what is the highest theoretical magnification that your scope can deliver. But obviously this one here being a 132 millimeter refractor, that's a good bit of aperture there. So that's the Barlow will get you some good results there. Very, very nice. Okay. All right. I was going to flip over to the Flickr group, if that's okay, Paul.
Yep, sure is. I bet it's full of Mercury sun pictures.
It sure is. In fact, let me pull one up here, and let me get the screen share going here. Oops, wrong one. Gotta make sure I get the right windows here. Screen share. Here we go. Share. Okay, so here we go. This one is by Ralph Smith. I'm not sure where Ralph is located. Obviously, he's Europe or eastern part of the United States. And Ralph has got a really nice image here. He's got a lot better detail than I had here, you can see. So let's see what he says here. If I got some details on his image here, I know I've got get my control a little better here so I can see what's going on there. There we go. Let's see what he says here. Says Mercury still had half its transit to compute. I don't see where he listed the equipment that he used here on this. That's a very nice photo. You can just see how perfectly round Mercury is there, compared to the sunspots hanging out, up above it there. So this is a really, really nice image of the transit here. Go back to the group here. Let's see if we can find another one here. Got a lot of them. Let's find one in hydrogen alpha. Here we go. I believe this is in hydrogen alpha. There we can see some really good detail of the transit there. Obviously Mercury at the bottom there. That is, I'm sorry, I forgot to give credit. That's from David Simonetti, I guess. Let's see. He shot here 1,000 frames of video. Looks like he's in the London area, United Kingdom, and he shot 1,000 frames of video. He captured it with a software program called Fire Capture, which is free. It's a very popular program for image acquisition with CCD cameras, cameras sort of specially designed for astrophotography. And looking at the processed software that he used, one program he used is called PIP. PIP is a free program that what it does, it aligns images. So when you take images, like he took 1,000 frames of videos, even though he may have been using tracking on his mount, there may have been some drift in the mount. So the images may all not be perfectly aligned when you start doing your processing. So what PIP does, PIP goes through your video and generates an image and aligns everything for you. So when you do planetary or solar or lunar imaging, you may want to consider a PIP. Again, it's free, PIPPS. I forget what it stands for, but that's a free program. Now, he did his stacking with a program called AutoStackert. And AutoStackert is, I believe, Paul, don't you use AutoStackert as one of your primary tools?
Yep, it's nice and simple and does the job perfectly.
Yeah, I am a huge fan of AutoStackert. That's my go-to for planetary, lunar stacking as well. So he also used Registax, which is another stacking program. And registacks, there are these things in there called wavelets, which will allow you to get some really good detail in your planetary lunar images. So I'm assuming he went in the order that he's got listed here. Probably started with PIP, went to AutoStackert, did the stacking, aligning, and everything there with those two. Then went to Registacks probably to get some so the wavelets to get some detail to be pulled out, and probably finished up with a few touches, clarity, lighting, that sort of thing in Photoshop. So of those 4 programs, the only one that cost any money is Photoshop. And there are other programs out there that you could even use if you're looking for free options that would allow you to process your image without even paying any money. For example, a very popular image editing program besides Photoshop is one called GIMP, G-I-M-P. I forget what it stands for, but if you do a search for GIMP, editing software, it's an open source product that's very similar to Photoshop. That's really pretty powerful. I've seen a lot of people do some great processing with using GIMP instead of Photoshop. As another program I'll mention that's not free is Lightroom. I use Adobe Lightroom for most of my processing. It's not nearly as expensive as Photoshop if you were to buy a sort of a standalone license for it. But a lot of people who do, especially a lot of wide field astrophotography, do use Lightroom quite a bit. Paul, you ever use Lightroom for anything?
No, I can't say I have.
Yeah, it's really not primary for, I would imagine, a lot of for what you do. It seems to be more like let's say a landscape photographers use it a great deal. I use it, for most of my wide field stuff. So you don't really do a lot of wide field. So I don't think Lightroom will be really up your alley for the most part there. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the group here. Here's a neat image by Gary Marshall. Now Gary here has a sequence of 6 images here. Now Gary, let's see if it says where he's located here. I don't see where he's located. But now Gary used a Skywatcher 122 millimeter scope. That's a refractor because he used a solar wedge. Now, Paul, would you mind telling us what a solar wedge is?
Just hang on a minute. I'll just grab one.
Okay. So how about that? We cannot even tell you what it is. We're going to show you what a lunar wedge is. I've actually never used one. I've seen people, use them out in the field, but personally, I've never used one myself. It's kind of one of those things that's kind of been on my list for a while, but I've never actually gotten one. So Paul is going to show us. I'm going to stop screen sharing here. Let Paul get his, there we go. If you can see Paul's screen, so it's actually something you can hold in your hand. The wedge here, the end that's sort of on the right side is what plugs into your scope. And the top is where you would put in the camera or the eyepiece, right? There we go. So the wedge, tell us what it does now, Paul. We got it in there. Oh, there's the Lunt logo. Again, Lunt is based in Arizona, so they've got the cactus logo there. So tell us what it does, Paul. So we've seen it now. We see the lovely lunar or solar wedge. What does it do for us?
Basically, the sun goes missing. And 99% of it comes out this end and hits that heat sink and goes nowhere. And 1% comes out the top.
And that's what you get to look at with your eyepiece or image with your camera.
Exactly.
Now, a lot of us that don't have a wedge, what we do instead is we use a white light filter on the end of our scope, out on the big end that's pointing toward the sun. Is there an advantage to what the wedge gives you, Paul? Here we go. In fact, here is one of his, there we go. There's a solar filter that kind of a lot of us use. That's a much larger one than I have.
It's a full aperture 12-inch, that one.
Yeah, that's a 12-inch. So that's wow. That's a foot across for you Americans there. And that foil-looking material you see there is very similar to welder's glass. It obviously blocks and protects your eyes from the light. And we sort of have to give our usual disclaimer Do not ever look at the sun without some kind of protective filter like that on it. You will damage your eyes permanently, even if you look at it for a second. So please, please be very careful to use a filter like Paul just showed you, or if you have a wedge like Paul showed you. Now again, Paul, tell us what the, is there an advantage to imaging with the wedge over the filter there?
Tends to be better resolution.
Okay.
A wedge will only work on a refractor. It won't work on a big SCT like this one.
Right.
But yeah, it's a cleaner optical path, I think. So it's just sharper and nicer.
Yeah, I think from a lot of the images that I've seen, the quality image that you seem to get from the wedge just overall seems to be a better quality, a sharper image, better resolution, like you're saying, because it's not having to pass through that physical piece of film or glass. That in some filters are glass rather than that kind of film. So it does kind of make sense that a clean path for the light to come right in, and right into your, obviously getting into your eyepiece or your scope, and once the wedge has done its job there. So I've considered getting one, and I still may get one at some point. I'm kind of getting very jealous of these amazing solar astronomers that get these great images, and I kind of want to up my game a little bit. So there could be a solar wedge in my near future. Of course, if I do that, the old astronomer joke goes, as soon as I buy one, we'll have at least a month of clouds, and I won't see the sun for a month. So that's certainly something to consider. If I buy it, my fellow astronomers here will get mad at me because they'll have all this bad weather. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the Flickr group here. Give me just a second to get back over there. And what I was going to do is I had a really nice image. I'll get it back up for you here just a second. Where'd it go? There we go. Screen share. There we go. So anyway, the image that I was discussing, here we go. Again, this is from Gary Marshall. And Gary did use his Lunt solar wedge for this. And this is a 6-image sequence from the transit. And I'm assuming this is sort of in order from the top left. It looks like Mercury is sort of just entering the sun on the upper left. And as you kind of move across, it's getting more near the center. In the first picture on the bottom, it's very near the center. And then you can kind of see it starts to move down toward the bottom part of the sun. And also you can see he had some cloud issues there at the end as it was heading toward the end there. So this is a nice little 6-image sequence there. Again, he did use a Lunt solar wedge, and the reason his images may not look as clear as some of the others, as my guess, is because of the clouds that he was experiencing. Again, you can image the sun and the moon through some clouds, but you're going to lose some quality when you do that. But sometimes, if we really want to image, we'll just sort of put up with the clouds as much as we can because we really want to get some imaging done. Having perfect skies and imaging sometimes is a fairly rare occasion there. All right, so I'm going to go back to the group here. Okay, so we've seen, I think, quite a few really good images, solar images with the transit. And if you, again, want to see a lot more for yourself, again, please go to flickr.com and do a search for the Global Star Party. Even if you don't want to join Flickr, you can still go and peruse all of our photos. Again, that people from all over the world really do post. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift to a deep sky object photo that I was just blown away with. Was posted by, he only gives his first name here. Let me get it pulled up here. This is Matthias, I'm assuming I hope I pronounced that correctly. Matthias. This is from, let's see, the 6th, May 6th, so it's a recent image. And this is a really fantastic galaxy here called the Needle Galaxy. It has an NGC number, NGC 4565. And this is a fantastic image. And what you'll notice is this is a really fantastic sort of edge-on galaxy. So we're sort of looking at it sideways, and we're not seeing the big face of the galaxy like we see, for example, with example like say M101, the Pinwheel Galaxy. We sort of see that like we're looking at it from the top. Well, this one we're looking at it from the side, and you can see there's a really neat sort of dust lane going through the middle there, and you can see the bulge in the center there. That's sort of where the core of the galaxy lies. And what really blew me away about this, not only is the galaxy itself, but if you look around the image, for example, up to the left a little bit, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor or not, but there is another galaxy to the upper left a little bit. And then if you look down to the bottom part of the image, I see two more galaxies down here. And there probably are others that I'm missing. So there are two smaller sort of background galaxies at the bottom here, and another galaxy up there at about maybe the 10 o'clock position. So not only did he capture this amazing, galaxy, the Needle Galaxy, you can see, so thin and has kind of almost sharp-looking edges, which is an amazing object by itself. But all these other little galaxies, there might even be another one just below it there. I can't really tell. I'm not sure if I can zoom in or not. I believe there's another galaxy there. So there's just lots of galaxies all around this object here. I want to say this is in the Coma Berenices area of the sky. So if you were in the northern hemisphere right now, I believe it's sort of almost straight over your head. This galaxy, yeah, it's Coma Berenices. He's got it actually in here. So let me look at his details here. We estimate between 30 to 50 million light years. We're not really sure. And let's see, look at how many. So he took 44 shots, 300 seconds each. So that's 5 minutes. So he took 44 images. Each image was 5 minutes long. He shot at ISO 400, which is fairly low. Now, he did not take any what we call calibration frames. A lot of people take dark frames, flat frames, and bias frames to sort of improve the quality of the image by removing noise and helping to remove, uneven lighting, things of that nature. If you do a Google search for dark, flats, and bias frames, it'll tell you what they all do. But this particular image here does not have any, and I'm going to say I'm pretty impressed for no calibration frames. What do you think, Paul, for this image?
Looks pretty clean, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's usually when you see an image that doesn't have calibration frames, it does look a little bit noisy, and especially parts of the image may have, like I said, some uneven lighting. Now this does look like it's cropped, so he may have had some, vignetting in that you could see more in the corners, but it really looks like with the really, really good crop here. And now I do notice that his camera was a Canon 60D-A, and the 60D-A is a camera that Canon no longer makes. They made it for about 3 or 4 years, and it's basically the 60D, but with a modified sensor that's more sensitive to especially hydrogen, the hydrogen wavelength that we see a lot of times in emission nebulas like the Orion Nebula, for example. So that's a camera specifically designed for astrophotography. And I'm looking at his scope. He used an APM triplet. That means it has 3 lens elements. APO, apochromatic, so it's very high quality glass to reduce what's called chromatic aberration or purple fringing, things like that. Looks like 107 millimeter or aperture with 700 millimeters of focal length. So that's a good size refractor there. He used a Skywatcher mount. Let's see, he used a guide scope there. I'm not familiar with the Lacerda type auto guider. I use an Orion auto guide. I'm sure his is very good as well. And this is just a really good image that just sort of, I remember seeing when he posted it, how I've seen this image, done by, NASA and groups like that. But as far as an amateur astrophotographer, this is one of the best examples of the Needle Galaxy I've ever seen. So I was really very much blown away by this image. Again, not only for the Needle, but also the other smaller galaxies that are sort of in the background. there. So some really, really good image there. I'm going to go back up toward the top of the group and find a few more recent images here. Now, this next one here I'm going to show you. This is sort of in my wheelhouse here. This is Shah-Namad. I think most people just call him Shah. And Shah lives in, I want to say he's in, I think Malaysia, but this looks like he's traveled to Australia for this. And this is a wide field shot that actually was used with no telescope. Now, I have several telescopes and I love shooting with my telescopes, but I also love shooting wide field objects like this. And what Shah did here was he used a Canon 5D Mark II, which was modified similar to the 60DA. So you're going to see some really good reddish color in there, some pinkish areas as well. Again, those indicate the presence of hydrogen there. And rather than use a telescope, he used a 50mm camera lens. Now, the lens he used, a 50mm f1.8, that is a lens that costs, in terms of American dollars, a little over $100. Now, the camera is fairly expensive. It's a 5D. That's a couple of grand at least camera. But the lens itself is only a little over $100. So what he did here was he put his camera and lens on something called a Vixen Polari. Now, Polari is a little device that you can put on a regular tripod, and it tracks the stars for you. So what he did was he used a regular tripod, and he took 12 30-second images of this region of the sky, and he stacked them together. It looks like he did his in a program called PixInsight, which is not a free program that a lot of astrophotographers use that does some very advanced things. So he took 12 shots, each one 30 seconds long. Again, no telescope, but a 50mm lens. He stopped it down to f2.4. And a lot of times with lenses, we do need to stop it down a little bit to sort of find the sweet spot to where the stars are the most crisp. And looks like he's done a good job here. And obviously, this is a region of the Milky Way here, toward the core of the Milky Way. And you can see over here on the left, the large pink area that you see there, that is the Lagoon Nebula. It's one of the most famous objects that you can see with your naked eye. If you're in the northern hemisphere, it's in the summertime. Obviously, if you're in the southern hemisphere, it's a winter object there. But it's a very prominent object that you can see with your naked eye. Now, it won't look that colored with your naked eye. Your naked eye is not sophisticated enough or doesn't work well enough to show us color like this. But it's the long exposures that Shah did are what bring out those colors. And also the fact that his camera has a modification to help bring those colors out. This is one of my favorite types of astrophotography to do, is doing wide field with a camera lens on a tracking mount so you can get those good long exposures. And the core of our Milky Way, which is what this is looking towards here, is just an incredibly rich area. There's so many fantastic objects there. And you can see a lot of the dark areas. Those are dust lanes. And there are just as many stars on the other side of those dust lanes, but the interstellar dust is simply blocking our view. So all those little black lanes or, trenches looks like sort of through there. Again, there are just as many stars on the other side of that as we see, the rest of the image, but it's just that the interstellar dust is blocking our view of that. So let me see if he's got anything else here. So he did take this in Australia. He traveled down to Aussie country for that. And this was taken, looks like, over maybe the course of a few nights. This is 7th through 10th of May there as well. So this is, again, and he's a fantastic imager, a lot of things. Shah does some really great work. I remember last year he was doing some really good imaging of Venus during the daytime, in the middle of the day, not, towards sunset or sunrise, but in the middle of the day, he was doing some imaging of Venus. Some really good stuff there. So I love this kind of image. It's sort of a personal favorite type of image that I really, really like. Let's see what else we've got here. Oh, here we go. How about a little Mars? Okay. Kevin Franklin. Now, Kevin, I believe, is also an Aussie. I believe he is. And here are a couple of images of Mars that he's done for us here. Mars is, one of those planets that it's obviously not as large as Saturn or Jupiter, so sometimes people don't pay as much attention to it. But Mars right now is becoming really bright in our sky because we're nearing what's called opposition. Like I said earlier, Mars will be sort of in a line between it'll be Mars, us, and the sun sort of in a straight line. And that's when Mars is closest to us in its orbit usually. Also, at that time, Mars will rise around sunset and be in the sky all night long. So if you want to image Mars, I believe that's coming up. Give me just a second here. Find when Mars opposition. It's May 22nd. So just 8 days from now, Mars will reach opposition. So if you want to image Mars, that'd be a great time. And then Saturn opposition comes, let's see, not just also pretty close, June 2nd. No, I'm sorry, June 3rd, excuse me. Yeah, June 3rd. So we've got a couple of planetary oppositions coming up really pretty soon here. So for you planetary imagers or would-be planetary imagers, get your scopes ready for Mars and Saturn oppositions. And of course, Jupiter is still in the sky. So after June 3rd, excuse me, you could get probably some pretty good imaging of all three of those bright planets at nighttime. Okay, let's see here. A couple more. And Paul, let me know if you have anything else you'd like to share.
I've got my little Mars up at the moment, not as good as Kevin's.
Okay. Let me stop sharing and we'll get over to you. Oh, here we go. Ah, yes. Yes, very, very nice. Now Mars, again, Mars is sort of, this year is my year to hopefully get something really good like this of Mars. I've never really gotten a really, really good image of it yet. But this is the kind of image where you can see a lot of the surface detail of Mars. You can see the sort of whitish areas. Mars does have some carbon dioxide in its atmosphere, some sort of carbon dioxide clouds. You can see, Mars is sort of a dusty planet. So you can see some really good surface detail. Now, did you also is this a refractor shot or was this with the C12?
No, I got the big scope out for these. That's basically why it's out here at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, Mars is, like I say, it's we're very close in size to Mars. It's a planet that we're looking at very closely for a lot of reasons. We've got a couple of rovers that are on Mars right now, still transmitting images back to us. We think that perhaps there could have been life on Mars many, many years ago. We're still doing the investigations on that, but there's a lot of evidence to indicate that there was, water, flowing water, and that's sort of, very conducive to life as we know it. So Mars is the planet that was sort of got our interest quite a bit recently. Some people ask, well, why not Venus? Because Venus is also, fairly close to us. Well, the problem with Venus is Venus is perhaps the most uninhabitable planet you could imagine. Venus is just, for example, its atmosphere is essentially all carbon dioxide, and it rains sulfuric acid on you, and just it's sort of runaway greenhouse gases to the extreme. There have been some probes that have landed on Venus, but they've only lasted a very short time because of heat and pressure. We have very limited images of the planet's surface because of those thick, thick clouds. So we're not really considering Venus as somewhere we'd ever really want to go. But Mars, possibly, so anyway. All right, so nice image there. And Paul, I'll be honest with you, we got about 5 minutes left. I think I'm kind of talked out for the evening. So if you got anything else to show, feel free. Otherwise, I think I'm going to turn it back over to you to close out here.
No, it's got clouds. Just looking down the barrel of the big scope at the moment.
So this is Paul's, this is your 12-inch, I guess you said?
Yep, 12-inch.
So I see the focal length is 3,048 millimeters, and it's an f10 scope. Now, do you have a focal reducer that you sometimes use for that, for anything?
focal reducer for deep sky.
Well, you wouldn't obviously use a focal reducer for. I was just thinking if you ever wanted to shoot anything, any deep sky stuff. Obviously, you wouldn't use it for planetary. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
Yep. Yeah, it's got a 0.8 focal reducer on the deep sky cam.
Yeah.
It's basically Barlow's for planets.
Very good. So if you Barlow that, oh, that's over 6,000 millimeters just for a 2x Barlow. So that's some pretty. That's how you really get the good planetary details with a scope with that much aperture and that much focal length. And that's just some of the best planetary images that you'll see come from scopes like that. The largest scope that I have is 9 1/4 inches, which is gosh, I'd have to do the math to figure out how many millimeters that is. I think 2350 maybe millimeters. I have the 9 1/4 SCT that Celestron makes. I see you on your secondary mirror. Are those the Bob's knobs things that you little screws that you put in there? The three
little Bob's knobs on here for adjusting the culmination.
Yeah, if you've ever heard of Bob's knobs before, if you're not familiar with them, some scopes have what's called a secondary mirror that you will need to adjust to align the mirrors, or what we call collimate them. And the scopes often come with screws there that you may need an Allen wrench for. And that's a little bit troublesome because you don't want to, if you accidentally drop the Allen wrench, it could be a problem, especially with a Dobsonian type scope. But the Bob's knobs are where you can replace the screws with these little knobs that you can just turn with your hand. So it makes the collimation a much easier job than what often comes from the factory.
Exactly. You don't want to be playing around bits of metal in front of a nice big shiny secret.
A metal tool like that does not go well in the front of a scope with glass that can be broken and mirrors that can be damaged. So one of those things I wondered why the manufacturers didn't sort of have their own version of that. Maybe there's some kind of copyright issue or patent. But Bob's knobs, I think I bought mine for $10, $12 for the set. It's one of the best investments I've ever made.
Exactly. Yeah, well, with that, I think we're pretty much done an hour, so we might just wrap it up, and hopefully the clouds will go away for next week's show.
Hopefully so. All right, well, thanks a lot, Paul. I appreciate it, and we'll be back at it next week.
Yep, thanks, Stephen. Thanks all our viewers. We'll see you next time.